I was recently tagged in a Facebook post. It was one of those things where you write down 12 albums, tag a friend, and they do the same thing. I started thinking about those albums and realized that in a way they make up the soundtrack of my life. So I figured I'd share those albums with you and the reason for my personal attachment. This video is very much going to be a biography looking at the music that led me to where I am now. So here are the 12 albums that defined me. Number 1, Enema of the State by Blink-182, which it seems I've lost or else I'd hold it up right now. Anyways, I feel like there's a generation of musicians who picked up their instruments because of this album, and I'm one of them. I remember watching Blink play All the Small Things at the 1999 MTV Music Awards, and I said to myself, that's what I want to do with my life. The next day, I pleaded with my parents to enroll me in guitar lessons, and I'm very thankful they did. And of course, the first licks I ever played were off this album. Number 2, Led Zeppelin 4. Fast forward a couple years, I've got power chords under my fingers and I'm itching to dig deeper into guitar. I was watching TV and that scene in Wayne's World where they go to the music store came on. You know the one, Stairway to Heaven, access denied. So curious me pulls up Napster, downloads that song as well as the album that it was on. Of course, I eventually obtained it legally as well. But this album was my gateway into classic rock, which really opened my eyes to the power of guitar. Number 3, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. This might be one of the greatest debuts of all time. Front to back, this album is just so good. I put this one on my list because back in high school, me and my best friends had a band, and our biggest heroes at the time were Guns N' Roses. And I mean, to this day, I still think Slash is the epitome of cool. We would try our best to play the songs off this album, which was a great time. Maybe not so much for my buddy's parents, whose basement we jammed in. Number 4, Texas Flood by Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble. Classic rock eventually led me to the blues. I kept hearing my favorite guitar players like Jimmy Page talk about all these blues musicians who really influenced them. While Stevie didn't necessarily influence classic rock, it was the first blues album that really drew me in and led me further down that musical rabbit hole. I remember when my guitar teacher lent me this album, I came back the next week and told him that I think this album was one of the ones that would change my life. To this day, I'm still absolutely in awe of Stevie's playing. He's one of those special musicians that doesn't come around that often. Number 5, Rust Never Sleeps by Neil Young, which I've apparently lost the case to. So I've got a slightly different reason for having this one on my list. When I was in grade 11, a dear friend of mine passed away unexpectedly. He and I started playing guitar at the same time, and almost every weekend we get together, mess around with our guitars, and get up to various other teenage hijinks. This was one of his favorite albums, and it will always remind me of fishing out at his cabin. These songs really helped me when he passed away, and even though Hey Hey My My can still make me a bit emotional, this album contains nothing but really happy memories. Okay, number 6, Axis Bold as Love by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. I actually don't really remember the exact time I got into this album, but that's because I think I keep going back to it over and over and over again. To me, this album really showcases Jimmy's songwriting as well as his guitar playing. Songs like Castles Made of Sand, Wait Till Tomorrow show Hendrix's more melodic and mellow side. It was tough picking this album over Electric Ladyland, but ultimately, Little Wing is one of my favorite songs of all time, so I had to put it on the list. Number 7, Dave Matthews Band, Live at Central Park. This was the album that got me out of classic rock and blues only mode, and it turned me on to some more mainstream and current music. This album is an absolutely incredible performance of some of their biggest songs. The thing about Dave Matthews Band that I really love is the fact that it's really catchy and accessible music that's also quite sophisticated and appeals to musicians. This is a balance I've often thought about and tried to achieve throughout my musical career. Number 8, Wildflowers by Tom Petty. This is my personal favorite Tom Petty album, not just because it's a really well-produced collection of amazing songs, but it reminds me of my first experience in the recording studio. I was playing in an original band called Shaky Gun, and me and my friend Will had written a bunch of songs that we wanted to record. So we put aside some money, went into the studio, and this album was very much an inspiration for us. We'd sit down with the producer, analyze the songs, listen to the drum sounds, the guitar tones, and try to replicate them in our own recording. Overall, it was a really fun learning experience, and I'm still quite proud of the record that we made. Number 9, Matt Mays and El Torpedo. To me, this album is just pure Canadiana and really reminds me of a specific period of my life. My first year out of high school, I had a pretty rough year. Another close friend of mine had passed away, which was really devastating to go through that again. I had also started university for business, which I wasn't feeling at all. And during that period, this is the album that I had on repeat. It reminded me that no matter what I have going on in my life, I'll always have music with me to get me through it. Number 10, Continuum by John Mayer. So after my first year of university, I realized that I couldn't stay on the path that I was on. I needed to do something else, though I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went to Australia to work, travel, and figure out life. During this time, Continuum came out. I listened to this album on repeat, and it kind of confirmed to me what I already knew, which was that I needed to have a life in music. To me, John Mayer created a masterpiece with this album. The songs are a masterclass in pop writing, and the tasteful guitar playing shows what a deep understanding John has of music. Still, when I'm going through tough times as a musician, I'll put this album on to remind me why I do what I do. Number 11, Bright Size Life by Pat Metheny. So without any doubt that music was my path, I returned back to Canada. The next step was figuring out how I would turn my passion into a career. I started looking at studying music at university and was eventually drawn in by a degree offered by Humber College in Toronto. The program started out as a jazz performance study, then branched out in the third and fourth years to include more mainstream stuff like songwriting, studio work, etc. It's very much a contemporary music program, but to get in, you have to be able to play some serious jazz. I had dabbled in jazz a bit before, but it was never really my focus. This album was recommended to me and really hooked me into the genre. It was the gateway to jazz for me. When I eventually did get into the program, there'd be times where I would just get fed up playing jazz music, and this was the album that I would put on to get inspired. Pat Metheny is one of the best musicians that I've ever heard. Technically proficient and mind-blowingly sophisticated. It's his debut album featuring none other than the Jimi Hendrix of bass guitar, Jaco Pastorius. I don't really listen to jazz much anymore, but this album still finds its way onto my stereo. Last but not least, Chief by Eric Church, which I would hold up, but I bought it on iTunes. Like I said before, my bachelor degree had 2 years of serious jazz time, and then you could branch out. When this time came along, I was pretty sick of jazz guitar, and I knew that is not what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to make rock and roll music, the stuff that I grew up on. Unfortunately, there wasn't much of a market for that, and I also wanted to have a career. But when I heard this album, I realized that there's a bunch of things in some mainstream country music that really embodied those things that I love about rock and roll with a slight twist. For me, this album sounds like Bruce Springsteen if he grew up in Nashville. My goal in life after graduating university was to move down to Nashville and write country songs for a living, which was largely inspired by this album. So I spent a fair bit of time going down to Nashville trying to grow my network there. Ultimately, I realized I don't want to be behind the scenes writing music quite yet at this point in my life. Essentially, I wanted to try my hand at being a star before that ship sailed. So I moved back to my hometown of Winnipeg with the idea that I would start a country band, gain some success in Canada, and when that eventually faded, I would leverage that into a career down in Nashville. My plan to achieve that success in Canada was to make insane YouTube videos until people started taking note. Quickly, I realized that I couldn't possibly ask other people to put the time into YouTube, which I found out was necessary. So I started my own channel, and here we are. And that's that, 12 albums that led me to where I am now. I hope you found that interesting, and I would encourage you to check out those albums if you haven't heard them already. To go with the nature of this post, I'm going to tag you guys. I'd love it if you left me a comment and told me about an album that's important to you and why it's important to you. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'm very close to finishing another really big musical video game cover, which I hope to have for you guys in a week or so. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.